Okay, we're live again. Hopefully with YouTube this time. Let's see what happens. Somehow we already have 10 viewers on X, which is crazy. I don't
Hello.
I don't even understand how that's possible. No viewers on Facebook or YouTube yet, but it hasn't given me an error, so I think we're in the world. We have a
Okay.
Facebook viewer. Doreen is representing Florida and everyone on Facebook at this point.
Hello, Doreen. Well, good. All right. Things are rolling now. So
Things
now
are
we can
rolling.
officially. Okay.
Yeah. Still no YouTube viewers. I don't know. But I think we're just going to go with it at this point because I cannot see anything that's a problem on my end. So maybe YouTube's having problems. I don't know.
Well, here we
We will
are.
start by saying that if you are watching this later and you're like, hey, I want to watch one of these live, the next one is Wednesday, October 15th. And if that date has already passed when you're seeing this, I don't understand how your algorithm works, but you can always go to the news page on BehemothDiscipleship.com and see when the next upcoming one will be. Theoretically, we stream these on Facebook, Twitter /X, and YouTube. Although maybe not YouTube this time. Still no viewers on YouTube. I don't know, man. We're just rolling forward. We have a good set of questions to get to, and we know how you like to do questions. So we
Oh,
should
yes.
probably just dive in, Josh.
Yes. And I do also have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that I have no hair anymore.
Yes.
Um, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how this chemo was going to treat me. My last dance with chemo, it didn't touch my beautiful hair, and this time, boy, did it ever. So I just shaved it all off. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was. I think I timed it perfectly. Like I cut it right before it started falling out in what would have been troublesome amounts of hair.
Mm.
Otherwise, so yeah, got ahead of the curve. No beard for the time being, although it's growing back kind of quick. It's already looking darker than the top of my head if my hat was not on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yes, my face has
Was
been
it
transfigured.
was it the Kohelet reflection episode at the end where we gave that update on the podcast?
Yes, I believe so.
I believe so.
I believe
So
so.
if you're curious on the full update on Josh's health situation, you can listen to the end of episode 465, and
Yes.
that will give you the full story.
And as an Easter egg, actually, I'm not even sure if Brent knows this. Oh, this would be
Ooh.
such a good Baymont deep cut. All right, so I actually got the original call from my doctor of like, hey, you probably have cancer again. Literally 5 minutes before one of the Kohelet recordings. I forget which one it was,
Oh.
but yeah, yeah, it was one of the later ones because I remember it had a lot to do with death, and it was like very. Uh, there is one of the Kohelet episodes that has a Josh with new information about his health,
Interesting.
talking about death, and I can't remember which one though. It might have been the second to last one. Now that I think about it, of the episode, like chapter 11. But anyway, look at this. I'm already taking up so much time.
All right.
All
Well, I'll
right.
let you get into it then.
Yeah. So as you said, okay, I see Doreen here is asking if I'm still up for the chili cook-off with Marty. At the moment, cooking anything is like I most of my cooking is me making potato soup for myself because that's like the one food that tastes good consistently for me. So now I am not in a place to be doing any sort of culinary competition, any kind of competition. But this is a good segue because I want to just say I am on a lot of medications right now, multiple medications that are like, hey, don't drive or make serious decisions. I have all sorts of weird substances in my body, so I reserve the right to have to end this early because rest. We cannot be hypocrites about this. I refuse. And B, I might lose my train of thought. I might be a little less comprehensible than normal.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well, we're
we are
ready for
in.
anything, Josh.
Yeah, and we have a really interesting lineup here because This is mainly going to be just one question. There are a couple other questions that are not actually really questions. They're more comments that were really interesting. Um, and we have one shorter question that I'm going to do up front because it's simple and quick. And this is from Mr. Garrett Ferguson. Um, Reading my way through the Bible in 30 days this month, and I've noticed how many times sticks are used when a miracle takes place. Any insight to the symbology? When I look it up, the interpretations are not consistent from instance to instance. Reference. So we're talking about Jacob and him using sticks to breed his sheep, kind of a genetic breeding manipulation that was revealed to him in a dream. We have the bitter waters being turned drinkable, Elisha and the floating axe head, and I'm sure there's more elsewhere. Thanks. So yeah, this is a good question. Right away, there's a couple key things, which is the biggest point in the Bible where there is a connection between sticks and miracles would be the 10 plagues in the Exodus, and there are constant references to Moses' staff, and interestingly, it kind of will sometimes call it God's staff, Moses' staff, or Aaron's staff, and I've never really dug into that, but it's a very intriguing little node on this question of sticks and miracles and why they so often go together. What's interesting, though, is that the linguistics are going to be important. So, for example, I'm not sure of all of these, but when it says that Moses threw a stick or a branch into the bitter waters, the word there for stick isn't the normal word for stick or staff. It's the word for a tree. So it's like, I guess it's a Hebrew way of saying like a torn off part of a tree. But it still just uses the word tree, etz, in the Hebrew. And so that's going to be different than the word for staff, which is matot, which is where we get the name like Matthew, Matityahu. And the interesting thing there is that the word staff, like the most common word for staff, which is matot, also is the word for a tribe, which is why when they're casting lots, as it were, for which tribe is going to be the priestly tribe, they do it by getting a bunch of staves together. Anyway, so there's some symbology there. As for why they come up in other places, like I think there's also a kind of Occam's razor, like a very simplistic answer, which is that there's a lot of sticks out there. It's a very classic type of object. Not exactly surprising for it to feature in a lot of stories. It's one of the OG items that human beings have had access to. So I would say that might be in a broader sense of like why you see it in all these cases. But going back to these specific miracles, sometimes a staff might represent a tribe or some other sort of symbol of like people as a collective, someone in authority. There's a lot of sticks being a representation of the people, the same way like a leader represents the people group that they're leading. So I think that if there's any symbolism, I would say that's probably the primary thing. And then if you have a case like with at the water at Mara, where you use the word eitz, you would want to check that because that may be an intentional symbolic reference, but it may be wanting you to think about the tree part and less that it's a stick. Are we supposed to connect it to Genesis 3 or something like that? Is there another tree we're supposed to be thinking of in context? That's what I would say. So anyway, there we go. Simple, easy, beautiful. All right. This is, we're getting into it now. This is the big question. This was the question that if anyone was around last time I was on this Q&A, I was made a foolish mistake to try and put this question at the end and ended up having no time for it. But it's because I knew I wanted to spend a really, really long time on this question. And I'm going to do that today. Yeah. And this question comes to us from Jim. This person has been, Jim has been listening to Rabbi David Foreman's series on the Garden of Eden on Aleph Beta. This is the podcast series, A Book Like No Other, hard recommendation from me. It's great. It's a lot more intimate. Like it's just a bunch of like recorded phone conversations between Rabbi Foreman and Emu, his member of his Chavurah, who runs Aleph Beta with him, and they go in really really deep into some great questions. So the whole first series is about this topic that Jim's bringing up. All right, so we're gonna first hear a quote here from the Torah, Genesis 2 verse 8. The Lord God planted a garden toward the east in Eden, and there he placed the man whom he had formed. So that's a quotation. Here's the question. If the garden was in the east of Eden, what made up the rest of Eden? Great question. I'm going to go through all the questions, though, because there's going to be a lot of interconnected things here. Second question is, the tree of life is in the midst of the garden. God only gives instructions to Adam not to eat the tree of knowledge. What if Adam ate of the tree of life first? Does that mean he lives forever in an innocent state? A lot of things tied into that question, so let's keep going. Was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge a test? Which will you choose, good or bad? And those are the questions, but Jim has also sent us a follow-up for a specific video here. And this is where we'll get into like what Foreman is talking about, why we're hanging out in early Genesis, which is that in the episode that Jim's referring to here, Rabbi Foreman is noting that the tree of knowledge and tree of life could be the same thing, i.e. the same tree. And that is basically the subject of the entire first season of A Book Like No Other. That's why it's a great podcast. Definitely listen to it. It's juicy. And then Jim goes on to say, when Rabbi Foreman notes the Torah says not to take of the tree, he says the same verbiage is used when Abraham raised his hand and knife to slay Isaac, where God says, do not raise your hand against the boy or something along those lines. And it's the same verbiage as when it says don't raise your hand to take from the tree, I believe is the connection there. Am I understanding him correctly when he says that because Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, have eaten the fruit, that they had to leave the garden, or they would not necessarily eat of the tree, but destroy it? And this is kind of where the question lies. Maybe this just means using it for not, it's outside of its intended purpose. So let's just start there, because Jim's got some other parts to his question that I may not be able to answer some of your specific questions, Jim, but I have a lot of thoughts on this. I, in a lot of ways, have a super love-hate relationship with some of Foreman's stuff here. And the hate thing, I mean, more in jest. But I don't know what it is about our brains, but Foreman and I have some sort of like similar wrinkle pattern in our frontal cortex or something, because a lot of times when he goes into these deep dives, he ends up poking at things that I've also noticed and have theories about, and sometimes we're right on, like we agree with each other, which is great for me to feel good about a teaching or an interpretation I have. But oftentimes he'll take it in a different direction, which is not always a bad thing, but sometimes it bugs me. And so I don't like where he lands the series, or at least I should say I disagree with how he lands that series. And that's a little bit of what I talk about today we'll get into. So let's wind this all back to the start, because there's a lot of stuff that's a lot of pieces of information that are already floating here, and I want to make sure we get ourselves straight. So there is a midrash that talks about the two trees that Marty talks about. I believe it's in the podcast directly, like the both trees are being referenced as in the midst of the garden. And so, which one is actually in the center? And one of the rabbinic midrashic delvings into it is like, well, what if they're both said to be in the center of the garden? Because they're both literally in the center of the garden, because they're literally the same tree. But then, of course, this invites a million questions. Then why does God worry that Adam's going to eat from the tree of life if they already ate from it? Like, what's the problem there. A lot of stuff we could get into, but um, that is the larger context of the rabbinic midrashic question. But I want to start our look into this story, that the fall, that is to say, and the creation of Eden. Um, that I think that there is a larger, like, kind of lullaby effect, a larger elephant in the room that I want to dig into. Um, so, first of all, just to address this, like when it talks about Jim talks about his first question about what made up the rest of Eden. The answer is we don't know. Eden is a word that, if I remember correctly, means like pleasure or pleasantness. So, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Pleasantness, like it fits with the kind of utopian image we have of Eden. So, in that sense, it's a descriptive name, but it does make it clear that Eden is a larger place. Um, and Adam is, of course, created in Eden, outside of the garden. So there's this already existing outer world, and within that world, there is a section called Eden that we would imagine is probably pretty nice. And then within that, God has cultivated a garden. And so, probably on some level, this is meant like in a story structure sense to give us a sense of like how lush and beautiful and amazing this garden is. Like, what must a garden in a place that is already like, unmatched natural splendor, like how can you, through, tending and cultivating, how can you make something even nicer than what we would consider like a natural paradise? So that's what I would say is what's going on with why we have this kind of these little breadcrumbs. Like, okay, so the garden Eden isn't just the name of the garden; it's a larger area. I think what's important for this, and this is where we start to creep into the real question, and where we get lost, I feel, is that there is a world outside of Eden, and it's a world that apparently has nicer parts. Maybe there are less nice parts, rocky mountains, deserts, all these things that are part of the natural world, but aren't necessarily as lush and as useful for human flourishing, etc. So I think this is important to remember, like the way that the story of creation is meant to be told. Sometimes we elide parts of that because we have this theology of like, the world was perfect, i.e. Eden, and not also remembering that it's like, okay, well, there's a distinction between what's inside of Eden and outside of Eden. There's also a distinction between what's inside the garden and outside of the garden. And so because of that, if we're thinking about the East, we're also, there's a lot of things we could connect it to in terms of like, why is this happening in the East? East and West have temporal connections. The sun rises in the East, sets in the West. Probably should have done that the other way, but anyway. So West is future. That's where the sun is heading. East goes against the grain, goes back where the sun started from. So this is also kind of, just establishing that this is like, this is the center of the beginning of human life. So, it makes sense for something like that to be in the eastern part of something where the sun comes up, the dawn of humanity, or whatever we want to say. So, as to your question, what made up the rest of Eden? That's a great, great question, and is one that really can only be answered midrashically. And I'm not sure if I'll get quite into that here, but that's, I think, an important caveat for exploring that question is we're probably not meant to know, like, in a concrete historical sense, what else was there, because, we're talking super ancient stuff. But Well, yeah, we'll see if the symbolism there gives us anything else to work with. Okay, so what would happen if Adam ate the tree of life first? Would he live in an innocent state forever? This is a great question, and of course, this is very complicated. If, as Rabbi Foreman suggests, the two trees are the same, what does it even mean to eat one but not the other? Very, very difficult question that I think will be enlightened when we get to the third question here, which is where we have the thing I really want to stomp on. Was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge a test? Which will you choose, good or bad? Now, there's a couple interesting things here. One is that, I think that and this isn't specifically about Jim. Jim's formulation of this is just how we think of this story. We do think of Eden as a test, as a kind of, like on social media, the little marshmallow tests where you leave a kid with a marshmallow so you can withstand temptation. We don't often say that, but that is the situation our theology describes. They were just supposed to be in there and chill, and their main job was not sinning, not doing the one thing God asked them not to do. And that would be a test. And then he talks about, or Jim says, which will you choose, good or bad? Which is interesting because that also isn't exactly the choice. We understand it as good and bad because that's how our theology defines the cause and effect going on in this story. Oh no, sin and death entered the world. How did that happen? It was from this moment right here. Therefore, they made the bad choice. They should have made the good choice instead. It all fits very cleanly with our theology and our understanding of, what this story means from a very logical, straightforward, literal, more Western perspective. And I think that's exactly the wrong way to look at this story. So let's say that God, he creates man, right? He has this beautiful garden. He puts man into the garden. And God says, hey, I want you to tend this. And, but you don't just have a job. You're also, on some weird game show where we really want to see how long your ability to stave off temptation goes. Let's see how you do. That feels a little bit weird. Like that, doesn't that kind of strike you as a weird thing for God to do, right after creating us? Like there's no, Adam's created and he's dropped into this little garden, and this is all he knows. Like it's if you dropped an infant into a situation like this, like we wouldn't, like, the I'm not saying that God's done something evil or wrong here, but like isn't this kind of weird? Like, why is God immediately testing us? Like, there's we other than God giving these instructions, like there doesn't seem to be a lot of relationship here. And I always, when I heard this story preached about, people talked about, like, oh yeah, he walked with God in the garden, and it's like, well, we don't actually hear, and like the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible doesn't say they hung out or had a conversation or anything. So when we jump to, like, well, of course, they had this, kind of this conundrum, this test, we, I think, kind of easily accept that that's what the situation is set up for. And because then the question becomes like, why is God testing Adam on this immediately? Like, if, like we in our world, we've learned both through, experience and through what the Bible talks about. Like if you want someone to be more like God, you have to disciple them, right? You have to put in time and build relationship. And that's what God's supposed to be all about. This does not feel very relationship. This does not feel very, God is love. It doesn't feel very Jesus. Like, what's this test all about? And, the Bible is often explicit, when God is testing someone or someone is testing God. And it doesn't say that in the text. So what I'm going to propose is that we completely reject that and say something else is going on here. And with that, I'd like us to just start by considering like what we are actually told and what it makes us think of. So we are created. What do we know? We are completely naked. We are placed inside of a space that's in part of a larger environment, and inside that space, it isn't some wild natural space. It is a cultivated space. It's a space that is cultivated to have everything we could need: food, presumably shelter. You know, it's a space to live. It's a space to cultivate, and we're in that space. We're being nourished by it, and then suddenly something catastrophic happens. Our eyes are opened. What does that mean? Were our eyes closed before? Our eyes are opened, and all of a sudden we realize with a dreadful reality that now we know what it means to be naked. Before we didn't know what it meant like to be naked, but now we know what it's like to be naked. We're blinded. We want to cover ourselves and hide. It's unpleasant. When I was looking at all these things, what kept coming into my brain was that the Garden of Eden is a womb, right? Like that's the image there. You're completely surrounded. You're totally cared for. You are unaware of any separation between yourself and your parent. And let's think about that. This is what ended up really selling me on this shift in perspective. Is that if we think about, and this goes to Jim's second question about what would have happened if they had just stayed in the garden forever? Why wasn't that an option? Or like what would that option have meant and looked like? Well, I'm going to pause here just because I know I'm throwing a lot of big counter theological ideas here. I don't want to sound too crazy heretical. So one thing I want to point out, if you open up your Bibles to Genesis 2, right after God takes Adam, the human being, throws him into Eden to cultivate and tend it, then God commands Adam, saying, and this is all part of the same command, and this is where, this is where translations are going to do us dirty. But I'll read it the way the translation has it, and then I'll correct it. From any tree of the garden you may freely eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for on the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. Now that is all one utterance under the verb God commanded the man. Now we focus on the last part. Don't eat from this one specific tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But the part before it is also included under command. And it doesn't say from any tree you may eat. It says from all the trees. Michol. From every tree you will eat. Now, for those of you that, haven't poked around in a bunch of rabbinic literature, like, trust me, asking the question, well, God does technically say they have to eat from every tree. Like, isn't that is part of the command? And this might give a lot of us pause, like, okay, but that you can't translate it that way, Josh, because then it contradicts the next part that says they can't eat from one. Duh. Okay, yeah, that's true. If this was from a Western culture, that would be probably a silly conclusion to draw. But We know for a fact that God's law is filled with laws that contradict each other because they apply to different contexts. And if there's part of you that bristles against this, what did Jesus debate with the Pharisees about? What do you do when your options are keep the Sabbath or love my neighbor? Those are two commandments in conflict. And we have to decide which one is more important. Is the sanctity of the Sabbath more important? Or is loving my neighbor as myself more important? And Jesus didn't say, oh, you fool, how can you ask this question? Commandments never contradict. No, practically they do. They often do. So let's look at this another way. If the situation is one where God created humanity and wanted, maybe instead of calling it a womb, we could also think of it as a kind of like the first honeymoon period, right? This period of time for two people just to get to know each other as partners. It's very similar to, what happens on maternity leave and paternity leave. You take time to intimately get to know your new child, your new spouse, your parent, if you're the child. And, wouldn't you know it, also, this is just a little side because, my background's in psychology. One of my favorite psychologists, one Mr. Erik Erikson, puts the infant stage of growth as being all about developing trust in your parent. Will you trust your parent to give you good things? Or are you going to be mistrust, uncertain if you're going to get milk or not, if you're going to get comfort or not? I think there might be something there. Okay, but before I get myself too off track, God gives Adam and Eve a commandment, or it gives Adam, when it's just Adam, the commandment to eat from every tree, but don't eat from this tree because when you eat from it, you will die. So let's imagine that there's all these trees. You're supposed to eat from all of them, but there's one that you shouldn't eat from because it has this consequence that will forever change everything. And if this, again, is analogous to a womb, this is like saying, hey, you have everything you need in here. Everything you need. Everything you need will be given to you as you grow and as you flourish. But then there will come a point where eventually what you need is going to break the status quo of the garden. You can't stay in the womb forever. At some point, you have to come out. God created Adam and Chava to tend the earth, to steward it, to steward all of creation. They can't do that from inside a garden where they just, are naked and hang out and eat fruit all day. Same way as your marriage can't be just one long honeymoon period. It moves on to, hey, you have to go out into the real world. Which, again, the story begins by reminding us there's a world outside of Eden already. It's not just this little pocket dimension where everything is perfect and then humanity introduced corruption and then everything became part good, part bad. Blah. No, there was a real world outside already. And they were inside the good part, and they were inside a perfectly cultivated part of the good part. And to me, that feels a lot more relational, that God created this garden, this space, for them to get to know the natural world, to get to have real experiential connection to the creation God was about to give them. And then there would be a point where they say, hey, and this is where it might rub people the wrong way. So again, lots of medication. Cut me some slack here if I step on some theological toes. Explore with me. This doesn't have to fundamentally change your theology. You're fully in control of your own faith. So play with me here. I think that what we see happening in Genesis 3, the temptation, is and can also be read as Eve getting to the point where she realized what God's desire was. That God didn't want us to live in this state of perfect divine union the same way, like, my wife was pregnant not all that long ago. That is a very intimate connection. My son will never be closer to his mother than he was while he was inside of her. And yet he has grown closer to my wife. Their relationship has grown in ways that would have been impossible if he stayed in her womb forever. And that required an expulsion from this perfect garden where all of his needs are met. And all of a sudden, his nakedness is not closeness to mom, feeling her warmth, feeling the drum of her heartbeat on his back. Now his nakedness means, the cold air. It's never felt cold before. And now, he's been completely surrounded by liquid and goop. And now he's breathing air for the first time. Like, think about the sting of that. Now you're feeling your nakedness. Before, nakedness was just, it didn't even mean anything. It was just skin and sticky stuff. Now all of a sudden nakedness means, I'm cold. I'm vulnerable. I don't think God wanted us to live in Eden forever, the same way I don't think a pregnant mother wants to keep her baby inside forever, even though that would feel really nice. I don't want them to ever cry. I don't want him to ever have to, skin his knee or bang his head on something. This is, I think, the right way to understand Genesis 3. And this isn't some, desire to just read a more kind, graceful, progressive understanding of this story. It's none of that. This literally is I think, deepening the story, because there's still the hurt, right? Like, people get hurt in this process, and that still has to be reconciled with. And that's what I want to walk through for the rest of my answer to this question. But before I get there, I just want to point out or establish what I think is going on, just so you guys know where I'm going, and I'm not trying to hold you in suspense or anything. So I wouldn't say this if the image here of Eden is a womb, and what we call the fall is really more of a birth, then we can also say that this wasn't like an easy birth. This wasn't a uncomplicated birth. We could even say that maybe Eve pulled the trigger too soon. Maybe this was a premature birth. And in fact, I would say that what we see is more a problem in their partnership and their communication, rather than them simply failing a test, eating the marshmallow before the timer is up. And to me, that feels a lot more consonant with the character of God, as well as more honest about how human suffering and the experience of bad things along with good things, how that actually functions in the real world. Because it's not, the idea that they eat this fruit and then they will experience good things and bad things. A lot of times people will point out, like, hey, how can you hold someone morally accountable when they don't even have an understanding of good and evil? Which is great. That's a solid argument. I would actually, that's a compelling argument, I think. Especially since we have moral culpability that theologically we say applies not only to the people who actually committed the supposedly sinful act, and everyone that comes after them. Like that has no precedent in any of God's justice, right? Like, we can look at the Torah, and sometimes God's justice doesn't fit, maybe our modern understanding of justice, like, for instance, with laws around rape. And that has to do with, context that is really, really relevant for why laws apply in different contexts. God is not speaking into the middle of a messy human context here, right? This is God setting rules when there are no rules. It's just naked people running around. So God does not have to capitulate to any of our, human bound concepts of justice. And you're telling me that this test that he puts effectively a newborn baby into has, a soul altering, causes an eternal judgment on people's soul who weren't even party to it. Like it doesn't sound anything like the conversation that's being had here. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. All right, so moving on from that. If this is, let's see. Oh, okay, we got 15 minutes till the hour. So there's one other thing I want to touch on really quick, and this is one of the hardest parts of the lullaby effect for Genesis 3, which is the snake. What the heck do we make of the snake? Well, guess what? None of us ever need to think about that because Jesus told us, right? What does Jesus say? He says, oh, the snake was Satan. Now, I am not one to contradict Jesus. I will say, though, that I don't think Jesus was giving a Peshat reading of this story when he said that. I think he was speaking midrashically. If he was just telling them something that was understood, like why would Jesus share something that is just the basic, the snake's the Satan character in the story, and that's why he does the bad thing and induces Eve to do the bad thing. I think that is kind of silly, especially in the context of what Jesus is sharing. I think Jesus is taking a story that, if we want to talk about the snake's role in the story, from a objective standpoint, the snake's role in the story is as what's called an etiological myth, which is basically just means a myth that explains why something happens a certain way. Oh, why do some storms have lightning and some don't? Oh, it's because, Zeus or whatever. You have a myth that gives an explanation for why things are the way they are. Now, when you look at a snake, it's the first time you see a snake, I'm not sure if I quite remember the first time I saw a snake, but it's a creature that is quite unlike many others. Has no limbs, right? That's a big, oh, this is strange. Snakes also have other surprising behaviors. That they make a strange noise. They hiss. Not a lot of other animals make that kind of sound. It's not quite like, the way that cows and lambs and, hoofed animals kind of whinny and neigh, and they make kind of sounds that, you can recognize, and they're similar to each other. It's not the roar of a lion. It sounds like someone whispering almost, right? So that's weird. What's this? This is a creature that's shaped weird. It makes sounds like it's almost like it's whispering, and it also sticks out its tongue a lot and has a forked tongue. Like, what a strange creature, right? And snakes are rife with symbolism in the ancient Near East because they're also associated with cycles of death and rebirth, because snakes shed their skin. So snakes are weird. People noticed. And what we have in the fall, or the story we call the fall, is an explanation of why snakes kind of sound like they're talking, but they aren't talking. Why? It's because they used to be able to talk, but God took that away from them. So now they just make sounds. It sounds like talking, but it's nothing. Why do they stick their tongues out? Oh, they're eating the dust. Okay, this makes sense. Oh, why are they crawling around where they used to have arms and legs, but because they could talk, that talking got them into trouble, and hence this story develops. And now I'm not saying that is the fullness of what that story is, but in terms of like story structure, this is what that type of myth is. It's telling us, how the leopard got its spots, why spiders spin a web. It's saying, hey, this is why snakes are weird. And so when we take it from that context of like, okay, the working backwards that way, that the snake is fulfilling, and here I'm going to just dip back into what Foreman says and what Marty says, an intelligent animal, something that is human in every respect, but fundamentally an animal. And this gets into, I think, the most important element of Genesis 3, which is helping us understand the paradox of being human. In Genesis 1, what we're told about our humanity is that we are made in God's image, but that's not God's entire design and desire for us. When God's planning to make human beings, God says, we'll make him in our image and in our likeness. When God actually makes the human beings in Genesis 1, it says that God made them in his image. And then it repeats that 2 more times, right? God made human beings in his image, in the image of God he made them, male and female he made them. And it just uses that word for make and image, and it does not, or I'm sorry, it repeats the word for make 3 times. I think it only says image twice. Neither here nor there. It does not mention God making us in his likeness. The next time we see that word for likeness used is when it talks about Adam giving birth, or not giving birth to, but Adam and Eve conceiving of Seth, who was in his image, so that in his likeness. And it explicitly in that genealogy parallels the way that God created Adam and the connection between Adam and Seth. So I think from reading Genesis 1, we come away with this understanding that we are there's part of us that is of a type with God. It's God shaped. It's in the image of God. That word for image or shadow can also mean, like it. One way you can take it visually is like a silhouette. Like I said, kind of we're God shaped. But you can also look at that. The word for being under someone's shadow is also means like being under their protection. But that's not really here or there. The point being that we have something God shaped in us, but for it to look like God's character, for us to look like we have a actual familial bond, I come from God, that is something that God wants to see in us, but has to be worked at, has to be developed. And, to dip back into some of the themes I touch on in the Kohelet series, this is right in there. We have this desire to be like God, to be, and I mean that in a positive way. I feel like most of the time when we say, oh, I want to be like God, like that's supposed to be our highest calling. But then, whenever we get around to talking about Adam and Eve, suddenly wanting to be like God turns out to be, evil, foolish pride. But, going back to this, again, this bigger concept, God created us, and God created us as finite creatures. And this is just, show all the cards in my hand. This is he was a lot closer to what in Judaism is understood as the evil inclination. We talk about, sin nature. And I hate that term because it's really misguiding in a lot of ways. Because we don't even see the word sin in this whole story. We don't see the word sin until God's talking to Cain. What we do see is the word evil, which, as I've said many times, especially throughout Kohelet, that word for evil does not inherently mean moral evil. It means evil as in destruction. So, a storm can be evil. Cancer is evil. It's an evil predicament to fall under. That's how the Kohelet would say it. Doesn't mean that there's something immoral about the little, whatever the little cells are that create cancer. It's not like I don't think it knows what it's doing or has moral culpability or anything like that. That would be kind of silly. But it is evil. And that, I think, is important to understand when we're talking about the knowledge of good and evil. Does not necessarily, especially I think in an Eastern sense, does not necessarily fit with a moral category. And I think this is also true in a larger sense where, like, if you look at other narratives about relationships between gods and people, like the human failing behind that is often like not something, again, like not something that is a moral problem. Like in the Enuma Elish, the gods are just mad that human beings are too loud, and they're just like, okay, let's exterminate them. Like, that is kind of the baseline for how people understood, God's judging their fate. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you weren't a good enough person. I think that is a really, modern insertion into this story. So if we pull all that out, what we have is a Chava, the first woman, talking to a representation of intelligence, reasoning, what in Judaism they would call the animal soul, right? The part of us that is the finite part, that is, our body, our need to eat, our need to drink, our need to have shelter, all those things. And the fact that we are finite, and the fact that those resources are often finite, lies behind a good chunk of human suffering and sin too, I would say, so her dialogue with this creature is, I think, a parable for within ourselves, this fact that we were made in God's image, something transcendent, but we are also fully finite and human, made of earth. There is this kind of contradiction of substance, this paradox that I think is at the heart of what God lays out for humanity. And I think that there is a lesson they're supposed to learn in the garden, and that lesson is in the tension between the two contradictory commands that God gives. And in Genesis 3, contrary to how everyone reads it, I think Eve figures it out. I think Eve gets it and has the right answer. The problem isn't with Eve's answer. The problem ends up being with how she navigates things with her partner, in which they both play a role. They both fail in part. And that conflict ends up getting resolved in chapter 3 before God sends them out of the garden. But this chapter, I'm telling you, is not about, our moral imperfection. It is about our imperfection. It is about our human finiteness, but not kicking us in our weakness, not, cursing at us for being so grubby and messy and unable to get our filthy human paws off the furniture. It is, I think, about God creating a space for us to learn, and that process is messy and often creates suffering, but that we can navigate it, and we can only navigate it through partnership. To me, this is a very hopeful chapter, and is really, more than anything, I think, ironically, I think if we understood this story the way I'll be laying out in the next hour, hopefully it won't take the whole hour, but we'll see, that the problem of suffering, like I think this is the answer ultimately to the problem of suffering. Why do bad things happen to us? Why are we beset by evil, even if we didn't do anything morally evil to deserve it? And I think this answers that whole question, but not if we insist on making it about uh, failing a moral standard, failing a test, and having to eat eternal consequences for that. Anyway, Brent, I know we do a thing at around the halfway point, right? Am I crazy here?
You're not crazy. Uh, I don't understand how my brain can possibly absorb another hour of what's going on. This is totally wild. Um, I will. So I was looking at the NET, and the NET actually does say every tree,
Oh,
and I was
nice.
like, oh, got it, NET. Now, then they shoot themselves in the foot with the footnote. They say, you may freely eat. Footnote. The imperfect verb form probably carries the nuance of permission, you may eat. Since the man is not being commanded to eat from every tree.
Because that wouldn't make sense. It's like the implied thing. That wouldn't make any sense. Well, NET, it's okay. They honestly, they still get the partial credit. That's great.
Partial credit, yeah. Also, Doreen says that there's a Bible Project video that talks about God intending for humans to move beyond Eden to subdue the whole earth. So people can look into that video if they want another perspective on that as well. But yeah, we will pause momentarily to thank everyone for giving us the things that we need to be here and do this, to talk about these things together, to wrestle together, to give Josh the freedom to go get help with his cancer. He doesn't have to slave away. Like, he has the opportunity to take some sick time and deal with it. We've been talking about getting an additional campus minister for you on your team to, help with your ministry in those times of when you are not able to do as much as you normally would. And all of that is made possible by our supporters, our donors, the people who listen to the podcast and share it with people. So we are just eternally thankful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And it is truly such a blessing. Like, as you were saying, Brent, love working for Impact. They've done such a good job supporting me through all my crazy health obstacles. And yeah, it is also something that, we wouldn't be able to do this without everyone's generosity and support. So it truly is just such a I know you guys can't always see it, but it is such a direct A to B for us. Like, we feel your generosity, and it means a ton to me, and it means a ton in the lives of students I work with, and yeah, all of it.
Doreen has a follow-up. It's not a video. I made an assumption. Bible Project is so much more than videos these days. They started videos, and I think of their videos by default. But she said that it has been mentioned several times across various podcast episodes. So I don't know exactly where to find it, but if you're digging around the Bible Project on the Garden of Eden, maybe you'll run into it.
Well, that's good. Hey, just like I said with Foreman, whenever someone else is out there saying the same things, I go, yeah, I know I was right. All
right. All right, well, I'll let you get back to being right.
Okay, let's get into it. So, all right. So now that I've laid all the groundwork, probably, let's just take a little stroll through Genesis 3 and try and read this stuff with fresh ears. And we can accept Jesus's midrashic commentary. In fact, I think Jesus's midrashic comment, I think why it's like a baller midrash for Jesus to say, hey, guess what? Mic drop, the serpent was Satan. Like that, I think that will be a more powerful interpretation on the other side of understanding what's going on here. And it gives us, I think, more insight into sin, more power to actually contend with it. But yeah, you be the judge. We'll see. Let's get through this. So, again, God gave Adam and Eve this garden, not as a test, as a home. And more than that, as a perfected little home, this little bubble in the vastness of the created world. And in this place, they were supposed to learn to trust God and to have a relationship with the earth itself. They were, what they were taken from. And there's all sorts of beautiful images and parallels there that I won't get into. But before this is all established, what we have is God, after commanding Adam, eat every tree of the garden, but if you eat this tree, then you will experience good and evil, then you will experience death. Ugh. So don't eat that one. But eat from every tree, but don't eat from that one. What a contradiction. How will they manage this? So then God says, you shouldn't be alone. You should have a helper. We know how that happens. Created Eve. Actually, she's not called Eve yet. She's just called Isha, woman. And this is in contrast to Ish, man, which is what Adam is now. And we have Adam giving this poem, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. There's a whole teaching I have about this that's really cool, and I won't get into it now. I have to say that, otherwise I'll accidentally tell the whole teaching. Adam names his partner woman as a corresponding pair to him, man. And we end that chapter with them in partnership. No shame, no barriers. They're with God. They're in the garden. They're with the earth. They're eating from the most amazing, beautiful parts of everything the earth has to offer, all its splendor and beauty and nourishment right there. And all the animals for them to get to know and name. And now we're going to focus on a specific animal, the serpent, who, as Rabbi Foreman points out and as Marty points out, is called cunning. This word for cunning, or was more clever, sometimes it says, than every other animal. This word is, I believe it's erum. I might be wrong, or erov. Anyway, it's this that has the same root as the word for naked. They were naked and unashamed. And the serpent was wiser, and this connection between the idea of being more clever or more cunning and nakedness is the ability to to see through things, right? To take off the protective layer and see what's lying underneath. That's the kind of cunning here. Now, we all are going to naturally make this negative, right? Because we know the snake Satan, so we're like, okay, he's the bad guy. He's twirling his mustache, and this cunning jerk, he's going to ruin everything. If we take that off, this is telling us this is the most intelligent animal, and thus kind of a fitting interlocutor for Eve to wrestle between her desire, her higher capacity to want to be like God, to transcend her limitations, to touch upon the infinite, and her base physical human self, the animalistic part of humanity that, just like the animals, wants to eat, wants to reproduce, wants to, fill its belly and take care of itself. That root selfishness of just being an individual body. So this is the conversation that's happening. And what's she wrestling with? Of course, she's wrestling with, like any good rabbi, Eve is wrestling with the Torah that God has given them, which is eat from every tree, but don't eat from that tree, you'll die. Now, we have here the snake starting the conversation. Has God really said you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? Now, what's interesting here is that, of course, God hasn't said this. What the snake just said is what what would be the exact opposite formulation of what God said. God says, "You shall eat from every tree." And so the snake just slips it. He says, "Did he say we're not allowed to eat from the trees?" So I kind of imagine it like this: like Eve's walking around, munching on fruit from a tree. Then she goes up to one, and she's like, "Oh, I shouldn't." And her body's like, "Wait, I thought we were supposed to eat from all the trees. Did God say we can't eat from the trees now? What changed? We were eating from this tree and this tree and this tree. They all look delicious. This one looks delicious. I'm your belly. I'm hungry. I want to eat that. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Why can't we have that one?" And Chava responds, "From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden," again here, the ambiguity, right? Which tree is it in the middle of the garden? God has said, "You shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die." Now, I'm not the first person to point this out. Pardon me. I've been hearing pastors since I was a little kid point out, this isn't what God said. God didn't say you can't touch it. God just says, don't eat from it or you'll die. Where did this additional "you shall not touch it" come from? And just as the rabbis concur with this, they say, oh, well, when Adam was relaying the command to Eve, just like us rabbis do, he added a little fence around it to give her one step removal to make it easier to, obey God's command. It's a lot easier to not eat something when you don't grab it with your hand. Because then, you'd have to jump up like a shark or something and try and take a bite out of it. That'd be pretty funny. But yeah, it removes you one step from the sin. Makes sense. Okay, sure. And I don't disagree with that. And I think what that points to is that Adam and Chava are already engaging with these rabbinic practices with God's commands. They don't have any problem saying, okay, we're gonna interpret it this way. So Adam has his rabbinic yoke, which is, well, God gave us this one command, but then he told us, whoa, hey, here's a warning. I think it's important we listen to that warning. And so we don't eat from it. We don't even touch it. We don't even think about it. We don't even look at it. We keep away from it. But Adam only added, don't touch it. So she was looking at it, and all of a sudden her inner serpent, her inner, as the Jews would say, the animal soul, saying, hey, wait, I thought we were supposed to eat from everything. Now all of a sudden we can't. And she says, yeah, we can't eat it or touch it. The serpent says back, you certainly will not die. For God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So let's stop here and think about this. And again, I think this is, again, helpful to think of the serpent not as some external perverse tempter. If we take that role out of there, and this is just her own physical, limited, subjective experience. So if she's going off of her experience and she has this fear that she's been taught to be afraid to touch or eat the tree, or she will die. Now, if we think about that just in, take our Bible nerd hats off, our Sunday school hats off. If you think that if you eat something, you'll die, what does that mean? Practically speaking, it means it's poisonous, right? There's lots of things that if you eat it, you'll die. So she's looking at this and saying, oh, I can't eat this. It'll be poisonous. But then she's saying, wait, what do I mean there's poisonous? I know God. God loves me. God gave me all these amazing things. Would God put poison in the middle of the garden? Certainly not. That's not like God. I'm not going to die if I eat this. And the rabbinic mind is turning, saying, wait a second, yeah. And when I think about, I heard a lot of times that Adam, like kind of gave Eve a redacted copy, essentially, of what God said. I wonder if Adam told her the full thing. Here's what God said. Because of this, I think we should hold this interpretation of not eating. But when she's looking at it face to face, she's like, I don't know. I don't know. We may be wrong about this. I don't think this is actually going to kill us. I think God is up to something. And what does the snake say? Again, as has been pointed out many times, the snake doesn't actually lie. What the snake says here is true. It is what factually happens. Your eyes will be opened. You will become like God, knowing good and evil. And then this next verse, Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, we have Eve make three like mental, what's the right word here? I guess in a like a syllogistic, logical sense, she makes three observations, propositions. Like she comes to three realizations. First thing is that she sees the tree is good for food. This is the point I was making about poison. She looks at it and she says, no, this isn't poisonous. I've met all these different plants, and some of them, maybe some of the, maybe not the trees. We know all the trees they could eat from, but maybe they had some bushes that were just flowers. And it's like, I know those aren't good to eat. You don't want to eat those. You don't eat the grass. You don't eat the pine tree. I mean, maybe you could, but it wouldn't taste great. And so she looks at it and she says, this isn't poisonous. God wouldn't put poison in here. She sees that it's a delight to the eyes, which again, with all our Western hangups about, pleasure and things looking good, like, we're very quick to jump on, it just looked good to the eyes. That was a trick and a trap. But she uses the same word here that it uses in the previous chapter where it says God made all the trees desirable. Like she is actually seeing the true reality of how God made these trees. Let me see. Let me jump back just to point out the verse. Just because I want to. There we go. Chapter 2, verse 9. Out of the ground, the Lord God caused every tree to grow that is pleasing to the sight and good for food. Wow. Eve just, through her direct experience, intuited, maybe observed, who knows how she came to this conclusion exactly, but she concludes exactly what the Torah says happened. That God made all these trees pleasing to the sight and good for food. And so she says, hey, this looks good for food and pleasing to the sight. And then that the tree was desirable, again, repeating another word that God just used to describe the creation that he made. Desirable to make one wise. Now, what's interesting is this is not the normal word for wise, which is chacham. If you're thinking about wisdom as Kohelet talks about it, as Proverbs talks about it, this is not that word. This is it is a word that comes up in Kohelet, the word sakal, which is interesting because it is, anyway, not getting off on rabbit trails anymore. We're staying on top of this one. It specifically denotes the wisdom to see something that will be profitable, right? Whether that's like a small business or a piece of land, or like, looking at a house and being like, we could put this here and that there. This will be a good investment. This will be worth my time. Seeing something that will lead to fruition, lead to something better. So when Chava sees God's intention in this tree that we have verified in the text, it's telling us she accurately saw what her body pointed her to, as much as its reasoning might have been rooted in her finite, limited drives, it pointed something out to her that's true. this isn't actually poison. It's not going to kill you. And isn't that sometimes what we're afraid of when we think about, stepping out into the world, into something new? Seems pretty uncontroversial and not alien, right? Like very consonant with my experience as a human being. So Eve has this moment of insight, says, wait, I've got it. We won't actually die. But, and this I think is what Eve didn't account for, it's not going to feel good. There's still knowledge of evil in there. There's also knowledge of good. So there are going to be greater things on the other side of that fruit, whatever it is. I almost said apple. There's no way it's an apple. I think the traditional, I like to read it as fig just because it works well with what happens next. But and also figs are delicious. I had a fresh fig recently, or not relatively recently. And oh my goodness, one of the most delicious things I've ever had in my life. Oh, fresh figs. Okay, so she sees that on the other side of eating this, there is something better than what they have, something more fruitful, and that will make her more like God. And I think she's right. If they had just stayed in the garden forever, like what? There's nothing there. There's just a baby in stasis, a forever fetus. Like for us to become something like God, we have to leave the womb. So she realizes that. And what does she do? She takes a bite. And then we learn that Adam is next to her. And I got to say, to defend this, what I know is kind of an out there reading, and might rub some people the wrong way. Like this does explain a lot more why Adam was totally like out of the loop here. Like if she is having an internal dialogue, reasons something out, and then just grabs the fruit and eats it, doesn't that completely change like Adam's response here? Because now Adam sees that his partner has just made a choice. Like, again, going with the womb image, it's almost like she is hitting the birth button, the launch button prematurely. And, or certainly without him being aware that it was about to happen. And then she hands it to him. And now he's got to make this decision. Do I follow my partner into death and the unknown? Do I not? And he chooses to follow his partner. All in all, it's hard to really feel like a clear like, man, X person really messed up. And I think this is where the mistake isn't, oh, these foolish, evil humans, they try to be like God. They try to usurp God's rightful authoritative place. It's like, no, they explored a little too far too early and weren't ready for the consequences. That also kind of matches up with what we see here. So, the situation here is a problem of communication. Eve has this whole internal thought process, which I should also know. I'm not sure if I've ever said this on a Q&A or an episode, so I'll say it. But we do not usually get, like, it is very rare to get anyone's thought process in the Torah. You will hear what people say. What they say isn't always what they mean, or, it may depend on who they're talking to. There are a lot of factors that can affect that context. Very rarely do we get an account of what someone thought. And so this verse 6, where we see this progression of Chava realizing that this isn't poison, seeing God's design and intent with creation in this decision, and then rabbinically saying, actually, I have the opposite interpretation now. I think we're supposed to eat it because, we're ready to leave the garden. But she eats it, and the problem isn't that, she doesn't, ask the man for permission, but more just, maybe include your partner in a life-altering decision, even if it's the right decision, even if it's a good thing to do, even if it brings you closer to God. It's still a lot to make that decision unilaterally. And then she hands it over to Adam. Adam makes the same choice. He follows his wife into the unknown. Good job, Adam. And at this point, we might think, Eve's the one who kind of messed up here still by not communicating. And I'll give that to you. Eve did not do a great job communicating with her partner here. Doesn't seem like, even if she explained her thought process, it's like it doesn't. There's no sense that she, she presents it to him after she eats. So certainly she makes a choice. And this is not a very partnerly thing to do, to say, well, I've sold all my stuff and joined the circus. Do you want to also sell everything and join the circus? It's a little bit of a not quite gun to your head situation, but Adam's under duress here. This is a stressful situation. He goes with her. And then cut to, this birth analogy I'm giving. Their eyes are opened. Oh, they're coming out of the womb. What's this bright light? What's this? Oh, now my skin is cold and I'm crying. And, they're certainly both thankful there's not a doctor there to spank them and make them cry even more. But nevertheless, they are now naked and feeling naked. They are no longer ensconced in the fullness. We could say this is the water break moment, right? All of a sudden, your whole world is draining out from around you. And it's pretty scary. And so what do? They, again, using this image of nakedness, at first as a symbol of this kind of perfect womb ensconced innocence and protection, now becoming this symbol of frailty and vulnerability, which again fits perfectly with this theme of being finite. Now, well, what if there's not enough for us to eat, right? Those are problems that exist outside the garden. Inside the garden, you got plenty to eat. Now we're outside the garden. Oh boy, real life kicks in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Their eyes are open. They're naked. They sew together fig leaves to cover themselves up. And again, is this so much about covering their nakedness because it's you don't want anyone to see you, or is it about nakedness? You're trying to get some protection. Now you realize, oh, those lion's teeth could do a number on me. Oh dear. They hide from God. God's looking for them. And now they say, oh, we hid because we were afraid, because we're naked. And God says, whoa, you're aware that you're naked. All right. Who told you that? Could it possibly be that you finally ate from that tree that I commanded you not to eat? And this is where we see Adam not being a good partner. The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me from the tree and I ate. And calling her the woman that's just what she's called at this point. He has not given her a personal name yet. And he throws this out very much, in a sense, disowning her, saying this, not my partner, this the woman. He could have, if he could have used the same word and said my wife, but instead he phrased it in a way as to emphasize that, God, you're the one who brought this problem in here. So in a sense, Adam followed his partner, but now he's saying, I'm not sure I want to be partners anymore. And that has to be the most unpartnerly thing you can do. So in this sense, Adam is also, not taking responsibility for the fact that, he made the decision to follow her because she's his partner, but now is also rejecting her. Like that's not fair to put on her either. He could have asked, he could have just said, "Wait, hold up, what's all this about?" But instead, he panics, he eats, and now he resents Eve for it. And so then God turns to Eve, and then God turns to the snake. And with the snake, I kind of already talked about this. This is largely, I think, an etiological myth, just kind of explaining why serpents are weird. And then, and I'm not going to get into the Jesus-y part. If anyone was hoping for that, that is not where we're going. Because there's more interesting things here. So God kind of gives Adam and Eve, it's been noted before, God, neither of them are cursed. The serpent is cursed. The ground, the earth is cursed. And we could say symbolically, like, this represents the relationship between humanity and the earth, creation. And this is where Rabbi Foreman's podcast leans a little bit more into our fraught relationship with the earth, which is why I do, like I said before, even though I disagree with some of where he takes these ideas, I think it's still really, really worth listening to that series. A book like no other is what it's called. Season 1 is on this topic. It's great. Even the parts I disagree with, there are good elements to it, and exploring like what is at the root between our fraught relationship with the earth and creation that we were supposed to steward and not destroy and abuse. Oh, there's plenty of things that could be said there and explored there. And I don't want to limit anyone from doing that. But that's not what I'm going to focus on here. I want to focus on this partnership bit. So they've both pulled the trigger on birth. They are leaving the womb. To both Adam and Chava, God gives basically the same response, in that there are two domains of work, of human, the human production of life. You've got to keep the life that you have alive, and you've got to create new life. And how is this represented? By tilling the earth, farming. That's how you get more food to keep living. And in reproducing, creating offspring. And these two forms of work are associated with Adam and Chava, respectively, which, in a modern context, obviously is problematic in a lot of ways. But just to throw this out there, I think this is really just trying to ensconce the fact that all of human flourishing, all the labor involved in all parts, which is a lot more than just having babies and growing crops. There's a lot more to it. But those as kind of shorthand for these two modes of labor, of productive work and reproductive work. I think that's kind of just the Eastern way to like use images to cover these categories that basically describe the arc of all human endeavors. And what God basically says is work is going to be hard. In the garden, it's easy. Tending the garden just means like what? Like, watering and pruning. It's a lot more work to do that from scratch, and this, I think, is what God is announcing to them. I don't think this is supposed to be a punishment insofar as it is like just a reality check. Like, hey, you're now stepping out into the real world. It's going to be hard. That's the knowing good and evil. So far, you've only kind of known good, but even then, it's like, how do you compare what's good in the womb with everything outside? Like in the womb, these things are undifferentiatable. You just have one reality. You're floating. That's it. You're floating, you're growing, you don't know much of what's going on. So we have God saying, now that you're out here, things are going to be tough. And guess what? Things are tough for a baby. They really, really are. Figuring out just how to move your body and make things work is a lot. And so God's letting them know, here's what's coming for you. That's the first part of God's address, both to Adam and Eve. And if you look at them, uh, he is pretty consistent. He uses the same words for like where it says pain in childbirth and in pain delivering children. Those two words are identically used with what God says to Adam of working hard uh, for the ground. Like it's literally the same words in Hebrew. So there isn't necessarily, I think, a sense of like a punishment that fits the crime. This, God does not frame these as punishments, I would say, because it could also just as easily be describing, hey, this is what's gonna happen for you. And this is why I like to describe this as like maybe a premature birth would be a better way to think of it. They're still going to survive, but it's a difficult process, and it was complicated by this miscommunication, this lack of communication between them as partners. And so I wonder if what God's saying is like, hey, there was a smoother way for this process to happen. Chava, maybe, we could have talked about all this and had like a little Chavura discussion, gather around and talk about, how to interpret the Torah. But instead, you just jump to action. And because of that, that created some complications. Now, when we look at those complications, some interesting things stand out. And I think God is responding to the now schism between them, where Adam is rejecting the partnership right as they're about to leave Eden. A tragedy, truly a tragedy. The first partnership already on the point of breaking. And if we look carefully at what God says to Adam, it sure seems like, well, first of all, what God has to say to Adam is longer. He gets 2 full verses where it talks about the land yielding thorns and thistles. By the sweat of your bread, by the sweat of your bread, by the sweat of your face, you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This, to me, sounds like God painting a picture for Adam of, not, hey, life's going to get hard, but it looks even more bleak, Adam, if you want to do this by yourself. Because if you don't have a partner, then you'll just work and eat and work and eat and work and eat and eventually die and become nothing. That's what a future without a partner looks like. And immediately after hearing this, Adam names his wife Chava, which is related to the word chaya or chai, which means to live. And the reasoning behind this name, because she was the mother of all life. God has made clear to Adam, not just you need a partner, but more like there is no life without a partner. Any future life that you envision is only possible with a partner, with Chava. And that's not just true biologically, but spiritually. And more largely, I don't think an individual can ever actually create something life-giving. We need to be in community to create life-giving things. This is one of the core problems with our society, I would say. And it's something God is addressing right here at the beginning. Adam's ready to give up on partnership, and God says, well, I hope you like having a life full of work that ends in nothing but dust, because that is what you will have at the end of the day, by yourself. Now, I did this first because I wanted us to hear the context of what God says to Adam, because what God says to Chava is one of the most problematically translated verses in the whole Bible. I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall raise children. So far, very similar. Cursed is the ground because of you. With hard labor you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Those are both 3-line poems. Those are the 2 parts between Adam and Eve that line up. Her follow-up poem is 2 lines, the part that's about their partnership. And it goes, your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Uh-oh. Well, how am I going to get out of this one? Well, first of all, I believe I've addressed this some places. I don't know, but I'll say it here. The word here for desire is really not translated well, or it's certainly not in the way we understand it. The word here is tashuka, not a high use word. It's only used a handful of times. But the root idea is not like a desire for something like to have it or to possess it. The root word actually has to do with giving forth abundance, to overflow. And it is used to talk about God's desire for his people. It is used in Psalm 65 to talk about rain falling and overflowing. It's used to talk about the rain desiring the land, God desiring his people. This is not a desire that wants to take something, but to give something good, not just a little something, an overflow, an abundance. So when God says your desire is for your husband, God is acknowledging that Eve's mistake had good intentions behind it. You wanted to give your husband something good. She saw with that wisdom thing, she said, oh, there's something fruitful here. There's a treasure here. It's like she found the center of the chiasm of the garden. Oh, the center of the garden. Oh my gosh, that works perfectly. She found the treasure in the center. And she was so, and man, can we blame her? She was so excited. She just pulled the trigger and said, I'm betting it all, putting it all on this being the center, the treasure in the middle of the chiasm, and let's do it. And she doesn't necessarily consider her partner, include him in that process. It happens inside her own mind, inside her own rationale, between her and her paradoxical natures that we all have. And I want to sit with that for a second because, it's easy to point at that and say, like, this is a misstep. You should have talked about it with Adam. But also, it's easy for us, I think, as human beings to, once we've experienced something, it becomes obvious to us, and it can be very difficult to bring other people along without us just shoving our experience in on top and saying, well, this is just the way it is. And giving other people space and time to have their own process. So, definitely not trying to create a picture of like, Eve had no part to play in this. She was perfect and righteous in every way. I think Eve is brilliant. One of the first great rabbinic voices making this interpretation on God's commands. And I think she's right. She had good intention. Her desire was for her husband to have good things. But then God said, yet he shall rule over you. Now, in the text so far, there have been a number of uses of words like rule, dominate, subdue, yada, yada, yada. What's very interesting is this word for rule is not connected to the ideas of subduing or domination that are used when it talks about humanity cultivating the earth, right? This is the word mashal. That's the root, mashal, which is also the same word as the word for parable. The title of the book Proverbs is Mishle, plural, Proverbs. So this is not just a normal word for to dominate or be in charge of or whatever, but this word is used before in Genesis 1, and it's when now that I think about it, it's also at the center of that chiasm. Oh, that's juicy. Never even considered that aspect of it. What's the center of the days of creation? Why, it's day 4. which is when God creates the sun, moon, and stars. And God says the sun will govern mashal, the day, and the moon will mashal at night. They will rule. Now, let me ask you this. That idea makes sense to us, right? We understand what God's saying, but we also understand that the sun doesn't literally have, like, sure, it rules the day. But the sun isn't, telling me how to live my life, right? The sun doesn't give me instructions on how to budget my money or, what to do with my life. At the same time, the sun is like the thing that defines what day is. It's only day if the sun's out. If the sun is not out, it can't be day. Like the very existence of the sun is tied to the definition of a day. So it's not that it's, there's no connection, that it's merely a symbolic connection. It is a fundamental connection. The sun does rule the day. It decides when it begins and it decides when it ends. And come to think of it, that's also how partnership works, isn't it? Partnership's only a partnership if both people are agreeing it's a partnership. If one person says, I'm done, this isn't a partnership anymore, then it's done. That's it. And of course, it can get more complicated than that, but you know what I mean. It is only a partnership if both parties agree it's a partnership. And so in that way, yeah, your partner does have a say in whether this partnership should continue. So that's maybe lesson number one. Like, hey, just because you had the best intentions doesn't mean you didn't just hurt your partner in a way that might make them want to end it. Like you affected them. But then let's think about the second reality of that, which is that the sun doesn't just decide when, the day starts and ends. It also has an effect on how the day goes, right? The weather. Is it a hot day? Is it hot as blazes? Is it nice to be outside? Or is it cool and shady and, warm and shady? Is it nice outside? Is it a nice moderate temperature or not? Has the sun hidden its face and it's cold and yucky outside? Is it nice and warm and sunny, maybe partly cloudy, sitting in the shade? The presence of your partner affects everything about the environment of your partnership, the actual substance and reality of how it's going. You don't necessarily have to be splitting up with someone to still be affected by their mood and how they're doing. And I think essentially what God is saying is that just like the sun rules over the day, your partner is as central to your partnership as the sun is to the day. Like their well-being, how they're doing, is going to affect everything else about your partnership. You cannot afford to just say, well, I had the best intentions, this will be good for us. You need to be a good partner and think about how, the way you engage with partnership affects the other person. And so this is where, I cannot in good conscience say that the, edict that God is giving to Chava is that now she is permanently co-pilot and can't do anything without the other person's permission. It's helping her see a two-way dynamic. That would also be true if God was talking to Adam about this, if the roles were reversed. It would be, hey, you can't be a good partner. You can give them good things. You can lead them into something good. But if you aren't helping them process it, then if you aren't helping them actually go with you, then you're really putting strain on the relationship. This is what it means when it says your husband will rule over you. It's saying that in a partnership, how your husband is doing, how your partner is doing, has everything to do with the daily experience of that partnership, whether it's healthy or not. It's not just about making the right decision for you as a couple. It's also about maintaining the health of the relationship. That is what I think is happening here. And first of all, I think we have to appreciate, like, this is such a subtle and nuanced thing that is woven in just a few lines and a few details. So to circle back around, just to quickly point to it, when Jesus comes back and says, what if the serpent was Satan? What Jesus is doing would then, in this context, assuming I'm 100% right, which, let's say I can acknowledge it, but there are probably some details wrong about this. If you had asked me about this teaching, 5 years ago, I would have had a very different read on how to navigate the poem for Eve about her husband ruling over her. I had a different way of navigating it. So I might still be wrong, But assuming this interpretation is dead on accurate, then the implications of what Jesus said are pretty big. He's like, all Satan is just that animalistic part of you that is selfish and can only see from your own perspective and doesn't necessarily empathize, is focused on what you want and what you think is right at any given moment. That's Satan. Wow. Like that, it would have some implications, right? That would make me have to rethink some things. That would be a pretty big bomb drop teaching. I think that's the tack that Jesus is on. But to back that up, we'd have to jump around and talk all about Genesis 4, which I'm not doing that. We're sticking with this. So let's wind it all the way back in. The tree of knowledge was not a test. The tree of knowledge was a necessary reality that Adam and Eve were going to have to face. The real world, being born. And Chava was a brilliant rabbi, still had some things to learn about being a partner. And I think what God would have rather happen is that they have, a conversation and realize, we're ready to step into this harsher, less forgiving, more demanding world outside where we're going to get boo-boos and scrapes and have growing pains and be hungry and have to cry and communicate to get what we want. It's going to be a lot harder, but we're ready to go into it together. Instead, they weren't quite as together as it could have been. But after God reprimands both of them, Adam names her Chava. You are the source of all life. Adam has learned his lesson. They come back together. God clothes them. And what's interesting is that word for skin that's used when it talks about God clothing them, the word skin is the word or. I know I've talked about this in the Mishkan series. I must have. But this rhymes with the word for light, which is also or. They sound nearly identical. And I wonder if what God does is simply remove their clothes and say, hey, I already covered you. This fits very well with John 3 and the whole, light and darkness thing. You can stand in the light and be okay. What's actually going to protect you is not having scales or shields, or what's going to protect you is being together. That is so much more crucial to your flourishing than whether or not a tiger is going to jump out and, swallow you whole. And I think that the moment where God says, oh, is he going to try and eat from the tree again, is, and this is where everything gets complicated about, well, wait, what if it was one tree or two trees? How does that work? One thing the rabbis point out and Foreman gets into is that when it talks of, there's a distinction between, there's some nuanced pattern in terms of them eating the fruit versus eating the tree. And Jim asks about it in his question. Foreman talks about it, and he ends up connecting the tree to this image of an umbilical cord. And this is where when Foreman brought up umbilical cord, and here I have this idea of the garden being a womb. That's when I was hooting and hollering. I'm like, yes, yes, it's exactly, it has to be. Um, so there is this sense of like, maybe what Chava did is cut the umbilical cord early, and God's like, whoa, 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 you weren't supposed to do that for like 8 or 9 more steps. Woof. Okay, we gotta get the doctors in here. We gotta get you guys out. We gotta get you guys out. This is not a drill. Um, and Because there's a weird distinction in the Hebrew between saying they will eat the fruit of the tree and saying they will eat of the tree, which could be read as just eating the tree. And there's a rabbinic teaching somewhere that like when God said to like something about the way that God commands the trees to give fruit, um, plants respond in different ways, and that the tree of knowledge was the tree of knowledge slash tree of life was the only tree that grew in such a way that like the whole body of the tree was like basically the same substance as its fruit. So like if you so it'd be like if you bit into the branch of a peach tree and it was just like peach flesh like that. That's so there was this distinction between eating from the fruit and then this possibility of them eating the whole tree or something along those lines. It's been a while since I listened to it. It's again, wild podcast. Definite recommend. Um, but yeah, I think that bit at the end of like, oh, don't let him go back and like we have to push them out again. It says God wants to send them out from the garden, but God has to push and expel them out, which again really parallels birth. You just want to bring your child into the world, but boy, you got to be rough about it, getting them out of there. So anyway, this touches on a lot of things that Jim said. Jim also brought up questions because of the connection with uh, the tree of life and raising his hand against it, and Isaac, Abraham and Isaac, about whether or not uh, the whole the binding of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, happened in the month of Nisan, which would be some Passover connections. And I would say, those connections are definitely potential, and I would say fruitful. So yeah, you're not crazy, Jim, as you put there. I think you're seeing some real stuff. And I'm gonna wrap this up here. The last couple comments we had, maybe I'll just read through these. We're coming right up here. Man, I really did just fill the 2 hours with that one question. Holy smokes.
I feel like if anybody has ever wanted to sit in on a live recording of the podcast, that was basically it. I
Yeah,
could
pretty
easily
much.
I could easily take this and cut it down into an actual episode.
Yeah, for real. Oh my gosh. Oh, yep.
But sure,
Yep.
if you want to read a couple more questions. I don't know. One of them looks like it would take 10 minutes just to read it.
Yes. And I just want to, yeah, like describe this because it's a really, there's a lot of really beautiful parts of this, but there were two comments, one from Carol Prentice, and later on Donna, and they both are talking about the Mishkan series I did, and kind of get at the same thing from different angles. Donna talks about how she really appreciates the overlap between the terms of rest and refrain with those terms in music, and the way that resting and refraining, which are like technical musical terms, uh, fit this pattern of holiness and creating rhythms and silence and uh, let's see, let me find a chunk of what she says here that I can just quote directly. I love to think of Sabbath in the musical terms of rest and refrain because the words fit so well within the framework of holiness to God in day 4, connected in Exodus 28, and in day 7, Exodus 31. Same song, providing repeated moments in our life with God to punctuate key moments for change and dramatic effect. Each build, contrast, anchor, and point to any necessary distinctions. And yeah, I love that way of thinking of how both like the cyclical rhythm of time and the experiential nature of the Mishkan and your days bringing you in and out of this place. Um, the big one that Brent was saying would take 10 minutes to read was this beautiful long message from Carol talking about a different sensory aspect of the Mishkan and really just talking about the like what the sensory aspect of being cocooned within the Mishkan, this place that is just beautiful, rich embroidery where there's candlelight and light filtered from outside reflecting off of gold and um, just like what it would be like to go from being in a desert to being in like probably a cool dark room and even we could say might be a little bit like going back into the womb a little bit. Oh man, that might be juicy. But just the way that the sensory experience of being so uh, enshrouded in this alien kind of surroundings. Uh, and what this really, and why I love that these comments came in the same time I was talking about this Genesis 3 business, is because I feel like we really still haven't gotten the the balance right on how to live as finite beings, but reaching for something eternal and infinite and higher than ourselves. And that, we know it has to come through community and through partnership, but also like we are still inevitably stuck in my individual experience. And I think that, you know, having uh, a willingness to imagine God seeing that human finite part not as inherently a hindrance, right? Like God doesn't say to the snake, you shouldn't exist at all. He says, no, you're gonna be lower. Like you need to be lower on the totem pole. You cannot have an equal seat at the table to the other part of the human soul. One needs to be in charge, and it's not you. But that God does not see that as uh, a fatal flaw or as some inherent problem, but rather as a relationship that needs to be cultivated as much as anything else. Our desire for food and water and companionship and all those things. None of those are bad or evil. They're good. God still called us very good, even with this paradoxical nature. And I think being aware of how keenly God wanted um, sacred space to subjectively, humanly feel different and transformative. Um, I think that the lesson we should take away isn't find a cool like womb cocoon mishkan so that you can go and do some cool like sensory deprivation or meditation or like that would be cool. But the message I think really is that you are not trying to uh, fight uh, that that animalistic part of ourselves. We're not supposed to be at war with it. We're in relationship with it. We need to understand its proper place. We can't make it more important than our partner's well-being. That's for dang sure. Um, but that it is through our relationship with that, again, as Judaism would say, animal soul, sinful inclination. But I like to think of it more as just the finite reality of our existence. Um, we can't fight against it. God wanted us to be this way. God's okay with us being this way. God's okay with us growing and finding the right answers and still doing it in the wrong way. Like uh, uh, God does not tell them that they failed. God says, you're ready for the real world now. You've reconciled, and then sends them out. That is, I think, the way we walk forward. And to me, that also makes a whole lot more sense of the role of the Spirit in our lives. And anyway, just wanted to touch on that, and I'll have to leave it there.
One final item of follow-up from Doreen. She did some digging. The Bible Project series, the podcast series, is The Image of God, and it is the episode "The Garden Was Not Perfect."
Ooh, juicy.
Also, related to something you were saying like 15 or 20 minutes ago, she said, "Preach it, preach."
Oh yes, I think I know when she said that part.
Yeah. So that is our Q&A for today. I am back on the internet in 2 hours for my reading of Deuteronomy, coming to the end of the Torah.
Yeah.
But our next Q&A, I believe with Marty, I don't know why it wouldn't be Marty, but it'll be Wednesday, October 15th. We'll have lots of questions. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us, Josh, your resources, the things that you've wrestled with. We appreciate it very much. So go rest well.
Thank you. I will. See you next time, gang.